Okay, one thing I wanted to... So, we're calling this podcast Rethinking It All.
Uh-huh.
That's your name on your Twitter, I believe. And,
Right.
well, what does that mean to you? What are we rethinking? Everything or anything specific? What does that mean to you?
Well, rethinking it all, well, it's probably almost everything in the universe.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've written a lot about the multiverse, and I've developed some proofs with a mathematician, kind of looking at some of what the architecture of existence is. So it doesn't get much more basic than that, of kind of looking what reality is. And in the multiverse, there are an infinite number of realities, universes, alternative histories, etc. So my theory kind of is supportive of that, my mathematical proofs. And so from there, I then move into other areas like, what makes somebody happy, and what leads for somebody to have a life of good well-being. And so I've written on that, and one of the things we know, I think I may have mentioned this previously, but positive thinking, positive emotions is what helps us connect with the universe around us, helps us connect with one another, is our feelings of caring and empathy and compassion, curiosity. These are all positive emotions that connect us with the world around us, people, nature, everything. And this is actually how the universe is built. The universe is built on this interconnectedness with everything across all these different realities and universes, and across in our universe between people and the air we breathe, trees, plants, people. And so it's this interconnectedness that's very important. And through this interconnectedness, we then have feelings of security. We're able to be more exploratory and happy. We're also able to be much more adaptable. With positive emotions, you're more adaptable. Whereas with negative emotions have their place because they help us with critical thinking, help us to know that something's wrong and we need to do something about it. But chronic negative thinking only contracts us. So we become more fear-based. And obviously there's a lot of fear-based dynamics in our society now.
Yes.
Economically, politically, in terms of relationships. And it's this fear-based that then leads to kind of narcissism and controlling and hate and a lot of polarization that we're facing. So
that's actually a pretty impressive answer in terms of what you're trying to accomplish. Have you had much experience in terms of like putting that into practice? Because you are a psychologist, so you see people, and in one of our previous discussions, you mentioned that your main goal is to help improve the lives of patients.
Yes.
So have you been able to put your ideas into practice through your psychology and had good results from that, would you say?
Yeah, I would say I've applied this to working with my clients about how to build their lives on positive emotions and constructive interrelationships. But that can be difficult because a lot of people come from a lot of trauma or abuse or neglect. And that moves people more towards a fear orientation. So it's difficult to get people to let go of their fear. And part of the issue here is kind of a cognitive one, is that we're more likely to hold on to something we can be certain about, that we can predict. So I'm a somewhat depressed person, sometimes I could be attached to my depression. I could be attached to maintaining the depression because it has a certainty. I know about it. I've been doing it for many years. Whereas becoming not depressed and moving out can be kind of scary, incredibly scary. And so people cling to who they are. We all cling to who we are in lots of ways. And sometimes psychotherapy can help people then shift and change. But I think one of the things I try to do that's maybe a little different than some therapists is not only do I look at the micro issues, like what's going on for the individual and their personal history and their connection with friends and loved ones, I also look at macro issues. So what is their job like? Is their job making them happy or is it oppressing them? Well, if it's oppressing you, then that's going to affect everything else. So we need to look at macro issues.
Right.
What about, are you making enough money to achieve your goals? Well, you may have all kinds of goals, but if you've got a job that it doesn't enable you to achieve your goals, then that could be oppressive and it could be harmful. Then we can look at sometimes get into larger political issues and philosophy and stuff. And because there's bigger issues that affect us.
All right.
Like one of the simple things is you have somebody who's lost their job. They get depressed because they lost their job, and a lot of people are very identified with their jobs. They get depressed, and then they see a therapist, and the therapist helps in lots of ways, and maybe creates the sort of the situation so that they can get another job. And as soon as they get another job, voila, they're not depressed anymore. Okay, because the system at a larger system level, they got what they needed. They got their job, part of their system.
Wow, that's quite all-encompassing.
Right. And of course, a lot of people are tortured by their bosses and managers. So that happens quite a lot. I mean, there are some good bosses and managers out there. Please don't let me get me wrong. But there are a lot that aren't so good. That's obviously, I work with patients who obviously are having difficulties like that. So sometimes it means being aware of how the system is manipulating you. What's going on politically, economically, to keep you kind of down on the farm.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean,
sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, I'm just processing it. I mean, because people, I would imagine, come with a lot of they're pre-programmed in a certain way, and rethinking it all, it's kind of difficult to get around some people's pre-programming, the way they see the world. So have you found it to be kind of difficult to get people to think? I can speak for myself.
Right.
Like I mean, a lot of times in my life I felt like I knew something, and I would, fight to defend it in a way, only later to realize I was completely wrong. And so I've always kind of taken a position now at this point in my life where I try not to act like I know anything, because,
well, that's good.
So I'm willing to rethink anything. But a lot of people I've met or know, they're not necessarily that way. How do you think you get by someone's, pre-programming or what they believe?
Well, it helps create our sense of identity, and it's very hard to let go of, is our identity. But so getting people to kind of look at other possibilities, at other alternatives in their life, to get them, let's say if you have somebody who is thinking very negatively, to help them think more positively, that can help move things. But we're very attached to our certainties and what we want to be and how we view ourselves. And I know in my own personal life that, it's only when I've gotten hit by some 2x4s that I have, been able to wake up and see things more clearly.
Yeah.
And that's hard. It's very hard.
So it's important to kind of have a wake-up call moment.
Yes, it is. Sometimes we all have wake-up call moments, and that's a good time to take advantage of them and to make shifts.
That's a good opportunity for growth, right?
Right. So if you get fired from a lot of people get fired from a job, or they get laid off, and they think it's the end of the universe. And sometimes it can actually be a new beginning. I know that sounds a little trite. Oh, I'm starting a new beginning. But sometimes it radically is. I know in my own life, I've been fired from some jobs.
Yeah.
And I thought it was terrible. And it then led to actually something a lot better. I was working at the university. I won't mention the university. Well, maybe I should. But anyways, I eventually got fired. And, and I was good at what I did. I was chair of the department of psychology. I thought I was a fairly good administrator, but it was kind of a waste of my talents, I think, doing that. It was fun for a little while, for a couple of years. And then I got fired. I will go into all the politics that led to my being fired.
Right.
No worries. Very thick. Anyways, I got let go. Actually, I was fired. About 5 or 6 other people were fired at the same time.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, it was like a massacre. Okay. Somebody was cleaning house, and they got rid of all their enemies, or so-called
much radical
perceived
thinking.
enemies. Perceived enemies. But by doing that, I then got more into I developed more of full-time practice, and then I could spend a lot more time on my writing. If I hadn't been fired from that job, if I was still at that job, I wouldn't have written like all the things I've written. Probably nowhere near.
Right.
So that was a blessing.
Oh, I can totally relate. I mean, where I'm at, right? When I started my channel on YouTube, I started because I had a recent business I had just, stopped. It was during COVID. I didn't have anything going on, and it gave me the opportunity to just go all in on an idea. And it worked out, and it worked out great. And I've never been happier. And things are just they keep building on themselves, to the point where here we are doing this podcast,
Right.
in which, no means a perfect podcast yet, I'm assuming, so I apologize for any audio jank or camera jank that I get, but we'll get better at this. But, yeah, it's like, gosh, at this point, I would be shudder to think of what would have happened if my life had just kept going on the way it was going without that negative thing being the catalyst for something way better.
Right, but you were able then to seize your opportunities. Certain things came along, and you were open to them, and you saw them, and then you threw the dice. You were able to take a chance. You didn't have to. You could have just kept doing the same thing you always did, but you then took a chance, and that then opened more of your world. And that's part of, I think the world is infinite in its possibilities. I know that's kind of a Star Trek thing too, but I really believe that. I think there are infinite possibilities at all time, but we just can't see them. Now, some of the possibilities we don't have any access to. They're just beyond our understanding and comprehension. And then there are certain possibilities that, maybe are not worth our time and energy, or have a very low probability of success. But then there's a lot of other things that have some, moderate level of success or even high success if we can see them. That's hard.
Well, you just said there, when we can see them. So do you think one of the most important aspects of that is being able to recognize opportunities or potential opportunities when they arise and take action?
Yeah. I think it's both it's a two-way street. It's not only, first of all, you have to open yourself. You have to be vulnerable to the possibilities and open yourself to them. And in some ways, the possibilities pull you. So it's not just you, it's other people in situations pulling you, and you're in a relationship with them, and together you move forward. It's not just you. There are other people, I don't know.
Right.
There are other aspects in the universe that are moving you along because you opened yourself to them. And so that's how I think most things happen, is that we're always in connection with things. And it's not just us, which gets at one of my major pet peeves. It's this constant meism we see in our culture, this constant focus on the self.
Selfishness.
Yeah, and selfishness, and everything is transactional, and everything is about the person, and that never leads to happiness. It might lead to power. It might lead to lots of money. It might lead to even pleasure of making people wiggle underneath you, or you're putting, it might have that kind of sadistic quality to it. There's lots of kinds of pleasure, but it never really leads to feeling harmonious inside, high well-being, a sense of peacefulness, a sense of real connectedness, a lovingness. It doesn't lead to that.
Yeah, I actually couldn't agree more with that. But I guess the difficulty in that idea, like for me, for example, and I won't delve too much into the details, at least not on this episode, but I didn't get to a point where I recognized my own selfishness as being so detrimental to my life, and how much better ideas of selflessness were until I, I was in ruins. My life was in ruins. That took that for me to realize what I needed to change. And all too often I think that might be the story of people who find that as the way to go forward. And the difficulty being getting people to recognize that selfishness is not necessarily a good thing, and that there's actually selflessness leads to a much happier living.
I think it does. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't follow what's in your heart, what's about you. Self-expression, manifesting who we are in the world, that's very important. So we need to be in connection with who we are and what we want, and to accept that and try to make something of it. But it's always through relationships with others and with the environment that these things unfold. So we need a certain balance between self-focus and kind of carrying out our dreams and visions, balanced with how we're connected with the world and with other people. And I think we are generally, we are individual creatures, but we're also very social creatures. I mean, if you go to any business, mom and pop shop or a large corporation, people usually work a lot harder and put a lot more time in than what they get paid for. Yeah. Why is that? Why do people who work for Amazon and Microsoft putting in 80 hours. I mean, yeah, they're getting paid well, but they're not getting paid that well for 80 hours, considering the stress and, the toll on their bodies
Right.
and relationships. But they're doing it because there's this need to connect, to be there for others, to be there for the larger collective or for the purpose of the business. That's pretty social. That's pretty altruistic when you think about it.
I've never thought about it like that. Yeah.
The whole, in other ways, if everybody was selfish in a corporation, everything would grind to a halt. Nobody would do anything for everybody. Everybody would be paranoid. Everybody would try to get away with whatever they could, and nothing would happen. Now, actually, this does happen in some corporations because I've consulted. And these are the corporations that fall apart because they become so individualistically focused, so selfish, that there isn't a connectingness between others and a shared dream or a vision, and then things do start to fall apart.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting thought because, I mean, most people, myself included, would probably say, when I look at a job, basically in any form, or any jobs I've had in my life, it was often a purely transactional thing. Although there were times, you spoke about like a ma and pa store kind of thing, where while working there, I legitimately did care about the health of the business to the point where I put in extra effort.
Sure.
Other times, I remember working at a bank, and I didn't really care. I didn't give a shit.
Yeah, right. I believe that. As if the bank's going to care about you. Right?
Exactly. Well, exactly. See, that was the problem. Is that I remember I was a teller at a bank at one point, and I got a top teller where I was the best in the region.
Wow.
Did the most transactions, and they contacted the customers. They were all happy with me, and I got an award, and it was a $20 gift card to Starbucks.
Oh, big
and I was a little disappointed by that. And so I was like, what am I working hard for?
Right, exactly. $20 Starbucks card.
Right. So I mean, there's different situations, but it's an interesting thought, though, in terms of people's motivations,
right,
and what drives them.
But also, a lot of businesses manipulate people. They manipulate people so that you will drink the Kool-Aid and you will work the 60 hours, even though you're not getting much of the benefits and somebody else is, higher executive or the corporation. So that goes a lot. And I mean, there are a lot of interesting workshops about how to be kinder, nicer, how to listen, communication. There's all kinds of workshops you see in companies.
Yeah.
And sometimes these things do improve situations, but sometimes it's a way to get people to think that actually things are improving when in fact they're not. And you see this a lot where, it's pretty easy to fire somebody who's kind of at the bottom of a corporation. It's as you go up the food chain, it always gets harder and harder. People are less accountable as you go up, and not more accountable. So there's not there's accountability going down, but not much of an accountability going up.
Right. Which is
problematic because that's what then leads to businesses to start making poor decisions. And this creates crazy politics also in companies.
Yeah, and this comes into, in terms of the stuff that you think about or write about, because you have a lot of unreleased writing that you've done on a number of topics, like economics, dating, governance, meaning of life, pretty much everything. That encompasses some big ideas right there.
I've just been thinking about this stuff, and I've had a very, varied life. I've been in many obviously my disappearance. I've been in many different kinds of situations that I think have enabled me to have a few insights about things. So that's why I'm writing them. Well, but are the end all? No, they're just ideas. They're hypotheses.
You're rethinking old ideas.
Yeah, and those have to be rethought because at some point they're going to become, if they were to become they will become status quo. And things will need to move beyond them because that's how knowledge advances. It's how science, art, everything advances. We let go of the old and we move into the new. That doesn't mean we don't hold on to history and the new, old in certain ways. You just can't create something totally new, but everything's based on something in the past.
Well, with things like economics and governance and stuff like that, do you think obviously things change, but do they change towards the better? Because the people who control these things are often, I would say, greedy, selfish people. Well, and in terms of it changing for the better, usually for something like that to happen, you need like a catastrophic catalyst that makes that happen.
Yeah.
Or does it? Do you think it could
Well,
naturally evolve?
things are better. I mean, if you look at,
Well, they certainly are better than any time in the past.
yeah,
I would
like
say.
300 or 400 years ago.
certainly.
I mean, you know, if the king said off with your head,
Oh, right,
it was
yeah.
off
Oh,
with your
yeah,
head. Now, it's a little,
it's much better.
harder to do that. It can still, you know,
Yeah.
it can still get things, bad things can still happen. But it is, I mean, there is more laws that protect, you know, the average person.
Right.
I mean, we do have sort of a democracy or a republic
Right.
in the United States. We get to vote every 2 or 4 years or often on people we don't want, but still we get to vote. You know,
You get
but-
some interesting options.
you
yeah,
get some
that you-
interesting options. So, you know, things are better. I think, especially for women, things are a lot better in more modern cultures than they were hundreds of years ago,
Yeah,
or
certainly.
even in fairly, let's say, pre-modern nations. Women have a very difficult time, don't have the same rights that we have, for example, in Europe or the United States and other places.
It's funny you actually mention that because still today you see a lot of people saying that women don't have a lot of rights or something to that, you know. A lot of marches and stuff going on these days over subjects like that.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's something I notice.
Right,
but,
right. Well, things are better, but there's still a lot more
there's-
for improvement.
Okay,
Yeah, there's a
fair
lot more
enough.
room for improvement. You know, one of the interesting things is you know, we think we live in democracy. You know, again, we vote every 2 or 4 years or something. But when you think about it, we spend most of our time in authoritarian institutions. Our corporations and businesses are not democracies. Okay, they're not. You know, and people spend 40, 60 hours a week in those. And then there are other, you know, and many nonprofits are also not, you know, they're not democracies. They're authoritarian medieval institutions. They're hierarchies and so, you know, how can we live more in democracy is something I try to look at. You know, how can we make things more democratic
What do you
and
think
more
it-
accountable?
Could a corporation say really? It seems like a foreign idea to think it could run any other way than with some sort of, you know, top-down structure
Well,
where
yeah.
you got, you know, a few people making all the big decisions and
Right,
on
right.
down. You know, that's a pretty foreign idea, I'd say, to
Right.
most people because we're used to, you know.
Right, we're used
One
to
way of
obeying
thinking.
and doing what we're told to do.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess
To a certain
the
degree.
argument would be that, you know, well, you know, this person owns or creates this business. Shouldn't they have the right to do with it as they want?
Right, right.
And
Right.
You know.
The issue is that nobody creates their own business. They create a business with other people and other, you know, other resources. For example, you know, they got their education from somewhere. They got their training from somewhere, oftentimes publicly paid. I mean, we exist all together. We're in this all together. And, you know, and it gets, you know, ownership is a big, super big issue. You know, maybe we'll get into some other times, like private property and all, but we do live in a society where we tend to be much more accepting of authoritarian structures than we think we should be. And authoritarian people and sociopathic people, and what I call predators, who can be also very charming, so they seem nice and all, but that then can, you know, don't necessarily have our best interests at heart.
wouldn't that be kind of a problem with any sort of structure? I mean, it's a problem, I guess, either way.
Yeah.
But I mean, you know, sociopathic people, is my understanding. You know, you know, like you said, they can be charming and stuff, but they tend to rise to the top of things sometimes.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, a selfless person might not, just because maybe
Right.
they don't have what some would call like that killer instinct
Right,
or
right.
something. You know,
Yeah,
is that an
it's-
issue?
Well, it depends. There's, you know, one of the ways I divide things up in that way, looking at what you're talking about, is there are people who are founders, you know, people who found a corporation or a business. And founders is quite a spectrum of personality. You know, you can have people who are pretty, you know, caring about others and, you know, want a company that is, you know, pays as well as it can and provide benefit, you know, do all kinds of things. But, you know, in a company where, you know, they're very focused on communication and they want, you know, the management really wants to hear when they're not doing things right from people below them. There are places like that, not many, but there are places like that. Okay, I had a friend who worked in a place like that. Actually, it was called Tableau. It's a big company here before it got bought out by Salesforce. Had that kind of culture, But then there are, and so founders can be all very different, and the founders sort of create the culture.
Yeah.
So, particular cultures can be more, in a sense, democratic, more communicative, more accountability is more up and down. And then you can have cultures where people have moved up the corporate ladder. In order to move up the corporate ladder, it doesn't mean all people move up the corporate, but a lot of people move up the corporate ladder have had to climb over bodies. And so to get to the top, it takes a certain level of ruthlessness.
Yeah.
And a certain, not caring, lack of empathy. And people who can do that oftentimes kind of get to the top. Okay, not that I'm saying all people at the top are like that, but
right.
But it has more of that because you have to, if you're competing with others to move up.
Right.
And you may not do it in the nicest way, and you may use other people's creativity or their caring, and then say it's your own. That happens a lot. I meet a lot of people who, are not given credit for what they're doing, and their managers take it. And then that moves them up the ladder, even though they may be far less competent than the people below them.
Yeah. It's something I feel like I've seen a lot, actually. You know, at least in my time, when I didn't live life as a YouTuber, but so I guess you've spent a lot of time, I guess, noticing these things that are wrong with society, economics, governance, and then trying to come up with ideas that would improve them, would you say?
Yeah, I'm interested. I think it's important not just to be critical or to have critique, but to come up with constructive alternatives or ideas about how to improve things. So I put a lot of emphasis on that. I'm just not interested in saying, "Oh, this is what's wrong." I think it takes I'm not saying it's easy, but it's a lot easier to tear something down than to build something.
Yeah.
Very much more difficult to build something.
So do you kind of see that it would be just a general negative on society for things to continue on as they are? Like,
Well, yeah. I mean, we're destroying this planet.
Right.
The planet's going to survive without human beings. It'll be fine.
Yeah.
I mean, the planet doesn't need us. It'll get through whatever we do. But it's a question of human existence. Where are we going to be at? Are we destroying all our resources? Are we polluting the planet so it's it's so poison and toxic we can't recover? I mean, these are major issues, and we're a society that keeps we want more and more commodities, more things. It's pretty hard momentum to stop.
It's how we've become maybe too materialistic and selfish and focused on gaining resources for ourselves without kind of thinking about the larger whole. Because I guess either we'll wind up like Star Trek or we'll be dead, right? Or
well, it
something
could
like
be,
that,
could be that direction, yeah.
Yeah, so I guess a lot of what we'll end up talking about on this podcast are these topics. So what do you, I mean, I guess you see both good and bad with everything that's going on today, right? And it's not all bad because we've made a lot of improvements over the years and stuff, but at the same time, some things are trending in the wrong direction, like when you look at the state of society, culture, politics today, I feel like I've seen that trending in the wrong direction in a way because I feel like there's more division than there was
more
20
polarization.
Years ago. Is that what you've seen?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's both things happening. I think there's a lot more polarization clearly in politics, and there's a lot more hatred. There's a lot more negativity just in general. And I think one of the ways I judge or try to think about what leadership or people in power are doing, regardless of whatever that leadership or power is doing, is are they creating more harmony? Are they creating more peace? Are they bringing people together? What are the results of what they do? What are the consequences? And if the consequences are pretty much negative, that kind of tells you a lot about them. And that maybe they're not really doing things for the benefit of society or even the individual. That there's something else at work here. So one of the ways to look at things is, what are the fruits? I mean, that's an old common cliche way of thinking, but what are the fruits of somebody's labor? And I think all we need to do is look at the fruits of somebody over a period of time, and that tells you a lot about them and what they're doing. Or an institution. What are the fruits of the institution?
Well, it leads to an interesting question that comes to my mind, which is, I mean, say if you looked at any past president or something, the last few we've had,
Yeah.
Half people would say, oh, well, here's a long list of things that this individual did that I think were great and fruitful, and then the other half would say, I disagree, and that would be for each president. So it's like, how do people start finding common ground today? Do you think? Because that seems to be like such a big issue,
that's really huge. I think the way to find common ground is to really listen and talk to one another. When people are very angry and very passionate about the negative way, oftentimes I find there's a lot of fear behind that and insecurity. So the key is to find out, what are people afraid of? What are they insecure about? And if you can listen and talk to people and find out really what's motivating whatever they're thinking, usually it comes from something around fear and insecurity and wanting certainty. Certainty is a huge one. That's why there's sort of this sometimes retro thinking where the good old days were better. That women should be like they were in the 50s or 40s, and that's the way women should be, rather than looking at the diversity we have. That's one of the positive things we can look at in terms of our let's say our ecosystem, our human ecosystem, is that over time there's been an increase in diversity across all kinds of ways, and that's a good thing, because the more diverse a environment is, an ecosystem is, then the more adaptable it is. The less diversity, the less adaptable. So just kind of going back to economics, the more centralized things are economically, the more monopolies there are, or oligopolies, the less competition there is, the less diversity in the ecosystem. That means there's less adaptability. And I think that's one of the reasons why we have so much tremendous problems with our economy now, especially in the United States, is because things have become too centralized. There are too many big things, too many big banks that can't fail, and corporations, and et cetera. Not enough diversity.
Yeah, and then fixing those issues, I think the average individual who just lives in the country probably sees a lot of these things as almost too big to think about or to take on, or that maybe their voice is inconsequential.
Right.
And I know I've experienced a lot of that in my life, the feeling of like, oh, I see this problem and I recognize it, but there's nothing I can do about it, so why should I care?
Right.
And should people care?
Well, I guess it's a choice. It's a choice not to care. But I think most people care. I think, being more kind and loving and listening and caring and trying to see other people's perspectives and not being so reactive, I think all helps a lot. Even the small circle of friends you might have, or acquaintances, or strangers you meet.
So basically,
you can all have a ripple effect.
Yeah,
you can
affect those around you.
Right, but we also need to look at our larger institutions. So we have to think about, what are the larger institutions doing? So in Seattle, there's a lot of homeless people. There's a lot of people who are barely making ends meet. This is a very expensive place to live in, and a lot of people can't afford their rents. And what do we do to change that? How do we make that so that works? How do we make it so that people can have a wage that enables them to have their own one-bedroom apartment or whatever, instead of having 3 people in the one-bedroom apartment, which is the case for a lot of people who are, working fairly low-wage paying jobs. Very difficult for them.
But we're in the Seattle area, by the way, which is so. And this is definitely an issue that affects this and many other cities.
Right.
But the way to handle it, I mean, you might get a lot of different perspectives on that, because it kind of, it depends on what you consider the root of the problem to be.
Right. Well, the root of the problem isn't that they're all lazy and don't want to do anything. A lot of these people are working 2 or 3 jobs. They have kids. It's not laziness. a lot of it is just that certain jobs pay so little.
Right.
So maybe you need a higher minimum wage. Maybe there's some other form of wealth redistribution, so that college is free or more or less expensive, or there's money to pay for daycare. That was actually something, I think it was, I may have this wrong, but during COVID, there was a lot of money for childcare, and I think that stopped recently, or is going to stop. And so how is that going to affect people who don't have a lot of money, who can't afford childcare for the most part?
Yeah, well, a lot of places have. I think I heard California recently upped their minimum wage, or something like that too. I think I forget what the amount was, but significantly higher than than what the federal minimum wage is. And but a lot of the arguments I was hearing against such a hike, obviously, is that if you make like a job flipping burgers at a McDonald's, which in my mind is a job that should be kind of almost reserved for like 16-year-olds in a way.
Yeah.
Sorry to any 30-year-old burger flippers out there, but it's like a job I worked. I made pizzas when I was young and stuff like that. And because it's a good entry level position for a young person to learn work ethic and stuff like that.
Right.
And making a job like that have a very high wage, or what corporations would consider a high wage. I guess their argument would be, well, we're just going to hire less people, or maybe we're going to mechanize, because there's McDonald's out there now or so that are like mechanized.
Yeah, there are. Yeah, there's more of that.
And so, will corporations and stuff like that not just maybe find a way around that? And so is it? Do we need to change corporations? I guess.
Well, it'd be nice to change corporations, because almost all our laws in this country protect corporations. They have more rights than you as an individual, believe it or not. And you can thank the Supreme Court for that. But the problem with wages is that lots of times wages are kept low so that the stock prices, the corporation can make more money, or the executives or the people who own the company can make more money. So there was a studies done some time ago that looked at, it's like a McDonald's, I think it was McDonald's.
Mm-hmm.
It was McDonald's somewhere in the States versus McDonald's in Finland. And in the States, they were making I think this is done a long time ago, they were making like $8 an hour. And in Finland, McDonald's employees were making approximately $20 an hour. And they had benefits, etc.
Interesting.
The McDonald's still made a hell of a lot of money in Finland. Okay, they still made money in Finland. They didn't make as much money as McDonald's does in the United States. So a lot of it has to do with how greedy corporations are, and they've gotten greedier and greedier. I mean, look at Apple. Apple's got $1 trillion in the bank. Well, not the bank, but they have like $1 trillion.
Right.
What are they doing sitting on $1 trillion for? Where did that money come from? Well, it came from probably not paying their workers enough. All
cheap
kinds
labor
of,
overseas.
I mean, people who work for Apple get paid pretty well, but not as well as the corporation, all of its wealth, etc. So I think you need to look at, what are the profits in a corporation? How much money are they making? And we have lots of billionaires now. Trillionaires. Where does all this money come from? It comes from somewhere. And why isn't that money going to the people who are producing the value, flipping the hamburgers or whatever they're doing? So it's more about some sense of balance. And there isn't much balance now. It's all about people at the top making more and more money and squeezing the people at the bottom.
So, I mean, I guess I'll come right out and ask in a way. I guess some people would hear some of these ideas and just go, are we talking about some sort of socialist thing here, or is it just, a little different from that? Because are you kind of against the idea of capitalism, or do you think it could just be better?
Oh, no, I think I'm very pro-capitalism. I actually been developing an idea called eco-capitalism.
Okay.
Where, if you look at capitalism, read Adam Smith, it's all about a diversity of many different businesses, and because you have a lot of businesses and there's this diversity, they then keep prices down. If we're looking at a money-based system, they keep the prices down because there's this diversity. So it's say a rich, complex ecosystem, and that's what then keeps the prices down, and there's a greater equity in terms of wealth distribution. So people at the top are not making 10,000 times more than people at the bottom. Things are fairer. Things are more just and fair in that kind of a system, versus a system where you have more centralization, like I was talking about, and more oligopolies, less diversity in the system. And as there's less diversity, then the money seems to get more accumulated by people at the top. And so, capital, if you look at, the goal of any corporation is to eliminate all the other corporations. It's about, but if you think about it,
right.
If they eliminate all the all the other competition, then there's no more capitalism. They're just a monopoly. They control everything. That's not capitalism.
Yeah.
That's monopoly. That's centralization. That's like having a king run everything. Okay, except it's a corporation. Well, what's the difference? So that's an inherent contradiction, in kind of the way most people think about capitalism. Is really about good capitalism, about diversity.
So
not about monopoly.
And what do you think would be the best? Is eco-capitalism, is that like an idea you came up with, or something you're picking up off of?
I'm not sure. I'm sure other people have come up with it before.
Okay.
I've just been writing a little bit about it, thinking about it.
And to achieve that, how difficult or easy do you think that could be?
Well, it's you have to decentralize things. So in physics, there's something called the Brownian effect. This is where I take something from kind of physics. In the Brownian effect, if you put matter in a space that's where there's nothing else on, just the matter inside it, and you just let it interact, matter has a tendency to accumulate. This is why we have galaxies. Matter is not evenly distributed in the world, in the universe. This is why we have cities. People congregate. This is why people amass power. There's a centralization of money. There's a centralization effect that is ubiquitous across all kinds of systems. So in a more diverse ecosystem, you have to counter this centralization, and that you have to decentralize. So there's different ways we decentralize. We have Social Security, that protects people who are older, and their money is then, money is taken from them and partly from the government and taxes. That's kind of a redistribution of money that then helps people to have Social Security. We have an income tax. We have different kinds of taxes. There's lots of different laws that supposedly prevent, that are antitrust laws that prevent kind of the monopolizations and the centralization, but none of them are really, really enforced these days. Because a lot of the laws were written in the 40s and 50s and are hard to apply in any way now. But
the world's changed a lot.
Right. But I don't see anybody doing anything about it.
Well,
I pick on the Democrats during the Obama administration had control of both the House and the Senate, veto proof, and they didn't change one labor law that I'm aware of. Not one. Not one law to help with, all kinds of things. That would help poor people out and maintain this diversity in the business ecosystem. Very little. Oh yeah, they did raise taxes on the wealthy by a couple percentage points. Okay, big deal.
All right. I mean, from my perspective, that the problem there even probably comes in that the fact that we let these corporations pay money to candidates,
yes,
pretty much as they want.
Oh yeah,
and then that just creates such a problem.
I agree. I think the Democrats are just as much bought out by the high IT corporations and information technology corporations as the Republicans. I don't see not much difference between the parties when it comes to these sorts of things. There's a little, there's lots of other differences, but yeah. So that's why there's haven't many new, there's no new laws. I don't see anybody doing anything about that.
And speaking for myself, I know that when I look at stuff like that, it's again one of those things I almost feel like powerless to do anything about, because you feel pretty small compared to I don't know, a big corporation or whatever it is that seems like it's controlling things and has more power than you do. And so I guess you just kind of get worn out in a way.
Yeah, I think people do get worn out. Yeah, I think you do get worn out. Yeah.
And yeah, finding ways around that and or thinking up ways to fix these issues is it's always been a tough one, at least for me personally. I mean, I can get on board with ideas and anything like that. I mean, hearing what you have to say about it, I'm like, oh, that seems like an interesting thing to try and everything.
Right.
You think these ideas just need to get disseminated more?
Disseminated. We need to think more about what our values are, what's important to us, what do we want for our children. How do we really create a sense of kind of well-being and happiness and meaningfulness, purposefulness in our lives? And it's not just about me, it's about sort of the we too. It's both. It's both at the micro level, the psychological level, the personal level, but also at the macro level. So we need to work in both worlds. So there's a lot of self-help books out there about how to be happy, and in positive psychology. A lot of them are very useful. However, we've had hundreds of these books over many centuries actually, and I don't know if people are actually any happier, because the problem is, individual happiness does not necessarily mean that there's a happiness in a larger systems level or community level. So you could be happy, but in a larger systems level, a lot of people could be starving around you. But things are good for you, but they're not good for the society as a whole. So we need to balance those interests out, the individual interests and the interests that are about the community, about the system.
So I guess it all kind of comes back to, in the end, getting people to start thinking more selflessly and less selfishly. It kind of seems like that would be the origin of, or the start to fixing a lot of these issues, no?
I would say yes, that's part of it, but there's also a lot of people who don't believe in themselves. I have a lot of people who come into my practice who don't have very much self-confidence, who don't believe in themselves, who are afraid to follow their dreams. And so there's not enough confidence for them to be kind of the individuals they want to be, to practice their sort of self-expression and manifest who they are in the world. So that's happening along with, the fact that people aren't as connected as they could be. They're both happening. People are more lonely now. I mean, you've probably read this in the New York Times. It's been everywhere. I think there's some.
Well known.
I think Britain has a minister of loneliness or something. I don't know. Anyways, loneliness is we're becoming more lonely because we're less connected, and the loneliness actually makes it even more difficult for you than to achieve to do the things you want to do, because oftentimes most things we can't do by ourselves. We need people to cheerlead us. We need people to believe in us. We need support. We need all this social fabric around us to help us to do things. Otherwise, we don't do them. Like, I don't know, a lot of my things that I've done in my life have first started out when I talk to people about them. I talk to some friends and colleagues and this and that, and as we talk more and more, and then I think, oh, well, then maybe I'll do something. Maybe I'll try this or do something like that. But without that initial support, it's very hard to get off the ground to do things. That's why it's very hard to be entrepreneurial in our society, because a lot of people just don't believe in themselves.
Yeah, society's kind of come to an interesting place, because, some people might say, hey, I'm connected. I talk to 50 people a day through this little device right here.
Right.
But it's almost kind of like a false connection in a way. Do you kind of agree with that? Because, to me, the connection you receive from, say, a person-to-person thing, initially I floated the idea of, like, doing this on Zoom. And then eventually I had to completely throw that idea out, because it's like, it didn't feel right.
Right.
Like, you could do it, and it would be saying the same things, probably. Maybe different, I don't know. But it just felt different.
Yeah, it is.
It hits different.
Yeah.
Connection in general hits different.
Yeah. I agree.
via phone and interpersonal like this.
Right.
So you would agree with that? You think that like the social media age and the internet and everything is because people are more lonely now, even though we are more connected, right?
Right.
By internet.
Well, I think goes to what you're saying is that we're not seeing each other in person. There isn't we're physical creatures. We need physical touch. We need perceptual touch. We need, like you and I are, people need to be together physically, and that physicality helps people then feel happier and more connected and believe in themselves more. And, I think, the whole, focus on, the smartphones is leading us away from that. That's sort of the negative side. On the other hand, the internet has really integrated the world in ways that are really good. The fact is that, people in China can be reading the same things we're reading. Yeah, there's censorship and stuff, I know, but in a sense, there's a tremendous amount of interconnection that's going on in the world. And it may be that interconnection that stops us from having a World War III. So that, there's some good things, but there is this sense that there's a disconnection because you're not dealing with you're not even dealing with a real person.
Right. I don't think some people necessarily register that.
Right.
That's why you get a lot of hate comments and nasty comments on Twitter or whatever.
Sure. Well,
because people things nobody would say in person. Right.
Right.
And,
that's true.
And so, there's that disconnect there between, this doesn't really register to me as being a human being almost. This is just something these are words on the internet.
Yeah, it gets into, addictions because these polarizing discussions and arguments and high reactiveness, creates a lot of dopamine in the system, creates a lot of kind of energy, and we can get kind of addicted to that. Like a drug, and not really deal with what's really meaningful. We're into the hype. We're into the polarization. We're into saying outrageous things, so that creates this energy. But the energy is kind of a poor substitute for real connectedness.
Yeah,
it's a poor substitute for feeling kind of good about yourself and feeling confident and feeling whole. And that's why it's so addictive, because the more empty people get, the less they know themselves, the less they know what it's like to be with others, the more they crave this sort of drug.
Yeah, so, on the internet, like anything else, it could be a tool for good or tool for bad.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
And I guess finding the balance is the key. In a way.
Yeah.
So we're about an hour in. Anything else you want to add? This is kind of our podcast that we're just talking about, in general, things that we will be talking about in future episodes. All these topics. Anything else you want to mention?
No, I think we've kind of covered quite a gamut.
There's
always more to cover, but hopefully this has been interesting or useful in some way.
Yeah. We'll call this the end of the first episode, everyone. Next one's going to be on dating, and thanks for watching. Appreciate it.